So guys, this is the beginning of a new series called the Meta Marathon with Fearless Draft. The idea was inspired by the past couple years of League of Legends esports and the Yu Olga Marie and ORT fights in FGO. If you know, you know. I will be taking on all of the available meta fights without using any ship more than once, in the order that they were released. Any two ships that are not allowed in Operation Siren at the same time will be considered the same ship. I haven't really done any planning at all, but there are a lot of ships and also a lot of fights, so hopefully it all works out in the end. First up is Hiryuu meta. I'm not exactly sure how difficult this is going to be after all these years of power creep in terms of equipment and fleet tech, and the older meta bosses also had no evasion and took 20% extra damage for no reason compared to modern ones. I just loaded up the Foxes since Kaga is one of my favorite ships, and they were pretty decent at the time Hiryuu first came out. And in the last main fleet slot, I put Unryu, who also has the 50% faster first airstrike. I used an IGN torpedo-focused Vanguard with Noshiro as the tank. Okay, getting into the fight, right away I noticed three huge problems. First, the boss is moving, and none of the airstrikes are hitting clean. Hiryuu meta in particular moves quite a lot, so I'll need to do something about that. Next, the boss sends out a bunch of planes which reveal the carriers because there is barely any anti-air in the fleet. Finally, the Vanguard isn't exactly surviving consistently and also doesn't deal enough damage. This all probably should have been expected, but yeah. It's been a while and I have other things going on, and doing an attempt like this helps me quickly recall what I need to do. First, given the number of enemy planes, it's probably better to use battleships. Next, I'll need some way to set up my main fleet attacks with either a slow or a route. Otherwise, a lot of the damage will be wasted. Finally, using Vanguards with specialization in AP or SAP ammo will be a lot better than using torpedo ships on auto. I think this fleet can still potentially kill the boss on manual, but I'm just going to put that aside for now. Okay, my idea now is to use Monarch for his low and respectable damage against medium armor, then heavy cruisers with AP guns for their consistently high damage output. I tried a bunch of different battleships and heavy cruisers including Blucher, Admiral Hipper Retrofit, Talon, Prinz Moritz, and then some battleships like Constellation, Massachusetts, and Tamaki. Most of these fell short damage-wise, except for Constellation and Tamaki, who output enough damage to be promising. I tried to avoid ships like Georgia and Warspite, who are obviously very strong, but I want to save them for some of the more difficult fights later down the line. Georgia's bonus damage is higher against other hull types too compared to carriers, so I definitely want to save her for a heavy cruiser or a battlecruiser fight. Eventually, I recalled the Italian cruisers like Zara and Pola, who were tanky medium armor specialists with their SAP barrages and general reliance on equipment for damage. I haven't really taken them out for a spin since they've received unique augments, although I'm pretty sure Zara's was pretty bad, but I feel like they should do better than the KMS cruisers at the very least. In the last slot, there were a couple options. I believe the light cruisers are not that great, but Gorizia is decent, especially with the Zara class buffs. Napoli is another one, but I definitely don't want to blow her on the very first fight. And then Vittorio Coniberti, who herself is a medium armor specialist, just like Zara and Pola, with a barrage that never misses. That sounds pretty good, so I ultimately ended up going with Coniberti, who I had already oathed and uncapped to 125. Since I'm using 3 Italian Vanguard ships, I thought why not use Vittorio Veneto as well, whose damage is not terrible and buffs the entire Vanguard. In the last slots, I still have Monarch, who is needed for the slow, and then Constellation because her damage was quite decent, and her reload is high enough for an SSR battleships to comfortably get 4 salvos using the Mecklenburg gun. I'm also using the double RPG adventure interface because I'm not trying to build the most consistent fleet, just something that can beat the boss once. After a few attempts, the fleet got the boss to as low as 3 bars of HP remaining, and I do believe that if I sat there and retried enough times, it would eventually succeed. However, I got bored, so I decided to try using Marco Polo instead of Constellation, who should be able to output more damage against medium armor, especially when buffed by Veneto. A major portion of Marco Polo's barrage is frontal, but it's more important to leave Monarch in the middle to apply her slow consistently. I originally had Marco Polo in the bottom slot, but as I watched the first couple of battles, I noticed that Hiryuu would hang out around the top area of the field more often than the bottom, so I switched the position of Marco Polo and Veneto. I had been using double RPG adventure interfaces before, but with the addition of a 5th Italian ship, there are now only 2 factions in total in the fleet, so I felt that it was no longer worth using. In terms of equipment, the Vanguard is just using the strongest things I have lying around against medium armor. In the main fleet, you're probably going to be seeing a lot of Mecklenburg guns and twin 457s, not because they're the best against medium armor on paper, but mostly for their lower cooldowns. It's easy to forget when you're using the new URs all the time, which I have been doing, but most of these older ships don't have as much reload and need to use faster guns to comfortably pull off 4 salvos within the time frame, especially when you run multiple battleships that don't have extra salvo capacity. This fleet ended up being quite successful. Both Coniberti and Pola did quite a lot of damage, not being very far behind the battleships. Some of the damage came from anti-air, but they have very similar anti-air stats to the main fleet anyway, so the results shouldn't be skewed in their favor. In comparison to Zara's unique augment, Pola's actually turned out to be a lot more impressive. Zara is definitely one of those ships where I have to wonder why they didn't milk more because of just how popular she was on release. By the way, this was done before Coniberti's face simulation, and here's what it would look like with the same equipment after her face simulation. Okay, with the first boss behind us now, the next one should be much easier using the knowledge that I gained, and the fight itself is easier too if I recall correctly, due to Arc Royal meta not moving as much as Hiryuu. First, I tried using Constellation again since she performed quite well against Hiryuu, and then Izumo as a replacement for Marco Polo, and Belarusia as a replacement for Monarch for her slow support. Although the amount that she slows is slightly less than Monarch, I thought maybe it would be good enough since Arc Royal moves less. In the Vanguard, I went with Anchorage, Baltimore, and Bremerton, since they also deal high gun damage like the Sardinia cruisers, allowing them to take advantage of powerful heavy cruiser guns. I tried experimenting with Izumo as the flagship to get better hit rate on her barrage and Belarusia on the bottom position, just to see if the slowing barrage could cover enough area anyway, but it didn't really. So I also tried using Bello as the flagship and Izumo in the bottom, since Arc Royal seems to hover the bottom of the battlefield more often. But in the end, it turns out that Bello's damage is just too low. Even if I uncapped her to 125, I don't think it would be enough. Her lack of reload doesn't really help either. I tried using Kazan, who also has a slow of the same strength as Bello, even though it doesn't say so in her skills for some reason. You can see it in the barrage data. I had her oathed at 125 already because I liked her design, and she also has a conditional ramping reload buff, so overall she does perform slightly better than Belarusia, but still not quite good enough. While observing the runs though, I noticed that Arc Royal actually stays pretty stationary for most of the attacks in a 4-salvo setup, so I decided to try not bringing any slows at all and doubling down on damage, replacing the slowing ships with Tamaki, who just like Constellation performed pretty well against Hiryuu meta and functions perfectly fine in the off-flag position. I also replaced Anchorage for Rune in the Vanguard, who provides more damage and should still be tanky enough to survive the fight quite consistently. Rune also provides an additional faction to the fleet which increases the potential stat buff from the RPG adventure interface. Rune Mew could potentially be a better option with her root, which can activate with some luck, and she was actually the best tank back when Arc Royal meta first came out, as you had to play manual to have a chance at killing the boss, which would guarantee that her root activates, and you can easily sync your main fleet attacks with it. However, I don't have her at 125 like I do with regular Rune, and the root isn't exactly reliable on auto, so if the regular Rune works then I'd rather just save the cog arrays. The philosophy for the equipment is the same as before, just the strongest anti-medium equipment for the Vanguard, offensive auxiliaries if the ships can survive. Except this time I am using the double RPG adventure interface because I don't have 5 ships belonging to the same faction in this fleet. Okay, It didn't take that many attempts actually before this fleet one-shot the boss at the very last second. I gave it a couple more attempts and Izumo ended up hitting some ridiculous numbers, so I don't know. Maybe it would have worked out eventually with Kazan or Belarusia too, and the bigger factor was actually using the 457 on ships that don't have enough reload. Bremerton seemed a little weaker than the other two heavy cruisers, which is to be expected, since she's the only one who hasn't received a unique augment yet. Hopefully she gets her soon and becomes really strong, because she deserves it for being Bremerton. Okay, the final fight for this first episode is Helena meta. I was actually quite looking forward to this one, since it was the first non-medium armor, non-carrier fight. It was pretty annoying to deal with this fight when it first came out back in the day because light armor busting options were quite limited. There were no HE rocket planes, and the best battleship gun was the 406 Mark VI, and then the triple 381mm Monarch gun, but only if you upgraded it to plus 13, and I didn't ever bother with that. Actually, we did have one copy of the Mark VII that came out with New Jersey. These days though, we probably have too many ways to deal with light armor. What I wanted to try was a full Dragon Emperor fleet using all of the guided missile destroyers, then Yasen as the tank and Changwu to provide massive damage buffs to the entire fleet. Helena meta moves around a lot, so it's very difficult to hit her with most types of main fleet attacks without some sort of route, but the missiles actually cannot miss, so there's no issue with hit rate. Anticlimactically, this fleet managed to one-shot the boss on the first try and even overkill it, so I didn't even get to realize the problems with the fleet before it was over, but I'll just say them anyway. First of all, ships other than Changwu can only receive her buffs if they kill enemy units, which they cannot in this fight as there is only Helena herself. So she was really just a selfish damage ship that offered nothing to the rest of the fleet. Still, she put up some decent numbers, and on a subsequent run, she did even more. Next, it's actually way better to just use the missile destroyers as vanguards, especially after realizing that Changwu wasn't exactly doing what I used her for. So I put Fushun at the front as well, and filled the last main fleet slot with Hwaja. Since it was overkilling already, I didn't even bother giving Hwaja the appropriate planes for this situation, because really, 5 ships probably would have been enough. As you can see, the 2 missile destroyers in the vanguard did probably over half of the boss's HP alone, and the boss died with 5 seconds remaining, so there were still missiles on the verge of going off at the end. With that being said, I think I low-key wasted the missile destroyers here with how much they overkilled. I mean, they're capable of outputting UR levels of damage against specifically light armor, beating out even the likes of Mogador and Plymouth, so they would still be great options in later light armor fights like Kirov meta and Jinsu meta. I haven't really thought about it too much yet, but hopefully I'll still have other options lying around by the time I get to them. Okay, that wraps up this pilot episode of the Meta Marathon Fearless Draft Challenge. I'll be using the tier list maker to keep track of the ships that I use for each fight so I can remember not to reuse any of them. Let me know what you guys think of the format. Should I go into more detail or just hurry up with it? Should I play the final run of each boss fight without interruption? I look forward to your feedback and disregarding it. No, I'm kidding. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.